Hello fellow adventurers, and welcome to another edition of RECAPitation Deep Cut with me, Oni Black Mage. So, the world ends with you. I'm going to lead with this. I like this game overall, and I think its pros outnumber its cons. However, for me personally, I do not like this game's gameplay at all. And this is not a slight against the game. It's very much a me problem. It's one of those, it's not you, it's me. It actually is me this time. I just never cared for 2D brawlers, even the ones that everyone loves, like River City, Double Dragon, Streets of Rage, Turtles in Time, X-Men Arcade, Scott Pilgrim. None of those. I only ever played them with friends, and even then for short sessions, like a couple of hours, and that's how long most of them are anyway, so that's why, they're short and sweet. It's great. They're not overstaying their welcome. They're not meant to be in long-form projects like an RPG. Playing with a friend, it just makes it so much better, but by myself, especially for an RPG, I just don't enjoy them. I don't like them for long periods of time, and I especially don't like it here. It's just not my cup of tea. I just don't find it fun. And then I also never love grinding for grinding's sake. Yes, there are some games where the whole point is grinding to get better loot, to grind to get more better loot, but the gameplay loop is at least interesting and fun. And this game is not interesting and fun for it. It has so much of that. So it's a lot of grinding with a battle system that I'm already not a big fan of. And so as a result, getting through this game was just honestly such a chore. That's part of what took inspiration away from making other side projects this past month or putting this out as late as it did come. It's just, when I'm not motivated to play a game, it really hurts performance. I wish I could say I had better discipline than that, but when it's a self-motivated project and the motivation's not there, it's rough. Now, all that being said, it speaks to its strengths that I still like it despite all that. So anyway, obviously I used the Nintendo Switch version and not the original. It's honestly just cleaner and the most complete version besides, and gameplay aside, I do think it's a good remaster. When it comes to aesthetics, one of the first things anyone notices about this game is that it's set in modern day. Well, modern for 2007. And right away, that's a rare setting for an RPG. When you really stop and think about it, that's kind of a really big point, because how many RPGs take place in the modern day? Very few. Usually most people think of stuff like Earthbound for that reason. I was very noteworthy for it. It's so few you see RPGs set in the modern day. Usually a lot of places like to maybe have their fantasy based on reality, but it's not technically modern day. This is a low fantasy for the most part. Yeah, it's low fantasy. It's technically low fantasy. And it's set basically in quote-unquote today. And yeah, you have like the loud, noisy culture of Shibuya. It's very prominent with mock versions of popular landmarks, locales, and then you got the food, fashion, and art in the shopping district. And by the way, if you listen closely to the recap, you'll know that I kept switching between saying Shibuya and Shibuya. Both are correct actually, as Shibuya, with no emphasis, is the way it's supposed to be said natively, and it's actually how they say it in the game. And the Americanized take of emphasizing the boo is just us being Americans. So I kept alternating on purpose. Anyway, even though Tetsuya Nomura was more backseat role in this game, leading art and helping produce a little, as a fashion designer, he's actually a really good pick for helping design the environments, clothes, and characters. They are very unique, distinct, and they reflect the identities of the main and supporting cast. It's very well done. There's lots of color, lots of imagery, crowded scenery, graffiti, hairstyles. There's just tons of people everywhere, even though they're recycled sprites, but there's still tons of people everywhere. You sense it's a crowd. It's surprisingly immersive. Them taking on a modern day Shibuya is better than the way they handled taking a modern day New York for something like Parasite Eve, which is, again, trying to be modern day, or modern day for the 90s, and it's just, they kind of missed the point of what made New York New York. That could have been anywhere. But back to this. For any locale-based game, you're running up and down the same town or city. It takes it from being big and intimidating to shrinking it down and making it intimate for the player. It's one of the things that made Yakuza so good with Kamurocho. And then you find yourself just knowing this town like the back of your hand by the end of it. And to use the Reaper's game as a mask for hiding what you can and cannot interact with, or where you can go or who you can talk to, it's a bit cheeky, but it's still in context, so it's allowed. I also want to shout out the sharp and clean sprites they use, not just for conversations but for battle too. The original pixel ones were fine for their platform, but I am glad they went with hand-drawn sprites for the HD upscale because they honestly show better detail and match the rest of the world better too. All of this is why I feel going to the end, just jumping, is why Coco's design, if you look at her, she just doesn't match. Her face, her art style, her shading, and definitely the way that her hair is not spiky and that she has normal sized hands, they're just different from everyone else. Now, the more I think about it, I think it's just too early to tell if this is just mismatched art style, or if it's something more clever, like it's a subtle hint that Coco was actually from a parallel world and just looks off for that reason. I guess we'll see. As far as for an art style choice goes, I am always pleased to see a game be clear, consistent, and cohesive, so when it comes to aesthetics, this game is no slouch. So for characters, I won't dwell on this too much. I will try to keep it brief. This game quickly becomes a story revolving around just Neku and everyone supporting him, and I think that's why a lot of people are rubbed the wrong way by the remix's ending. Neku himself, he goes from a journey. Like, he goes from just being this insufferable, selfish teenager, I mean, surprise, surprise, to just a much more open-minded and open-hearted friend who's still sassy and sharp-tongued throughout. Neku aside, I have to give props to them spending a good chunk of time to develop, both Shiki and Beat, and it really helped the way they grew them to also growing Neku. There was dynamic development. The way he started the game and the way he ended the game, all of them, they all went on this path and this journey, and that sort of dynamic character arc I love seeing. That part's great. I love seeing that in any story. It really bothers me when people go through incredible events or just redefines their world, is turned upside down, and they just don't change from it. I hate that. It's unrelatable, it's bad writing, it's lazy, and that is not the case here. Everybody's affected by not only the events, but each other. And they start from different spots, they grow together, and end up in different spots, which is nice. I like that. And there's still distinct parts in their personality that still persist, that make them feel like this is something Beat would say or act like. You can understand where he's coming from. Or a little less Shiki, but definitely Neku. In line with showing that no one is exactly as they appear. Like, Neku, Shiki, and Beat are not only the ones with secrets. You have Joshua, Hanakoma, Kitaniji, and most of the Reapers. I think almost pretty much all of them, except for probably Higashizawa. I don't think he was really hiding anything. It was pretty honest to a fault. Speaking of, all the Reapers, by the way, very enjoyable characters. I love heavy theming, like I said, and so I loved hearing each of them speak in a thematically central way. Like, Higashizawa is all about food, Sho is about math, Konishi is, if you listen to her and the way she talks, she's very highly analytical and calculating, and then Coco was just all about that text speak. At first I was like, wow, that's a choice, but then as she kept doing it and emoting alongside, I'm like, actually this fits, and this is a personality, this is a mood, and Coco kind of fits that. I actually liked the way they chose to write her, because if you're gonna write somebody with that sort of personality, I guess I'll say, they nailed it. They nailed the way that person would speak. And, at first I thought I wouldn't like her obvious trolling, but I low-key actually just really like her for the brief moment that we dealt with her. It was such a brief chapter. That's why it's just such a shame that Rhyme gets almost no love, but it is what it is. Though it also bothers me they never explicitly say what her entry fee was, and if she ever got it back, which in the secret report it says she doesn't because she failed the game. But it's heavily suggested that her entry was her dreams. That's why she's like, oh, I don't have a dream, and Beat was thrown off by that. But then again, when someone loses some of their memory like she did, that personality changes, just like with Neku. And since Beat was such a big part of her life and death, as it were, it's not really clear if that was just a side effect of that or not. They never confirm what her dream was. Even Konishi says, oh yeah, she bet something else of her own, but I don't remember what it is. They never explicitly say, it's just suggested. And I'm not taking her a New Day version, because that was an illusion and that was bogus anyway. Maybe the sequel or anime can decide on something. Koki and Uzuki, by the way, they gave me such Team Rocket vibes. It's just this odd couple who are just morally flexible, but they aren't ultimately bad people. They just have an integrity that just doesn't completely align with their job, and yet they still take their job very seriously. All in all, this cast grows, and what helps is the amount of dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue writing here, a lot of banter, a lot of back and forth. If you look at the recap, it's 98% conversations, and barely any gameplay, and that really is how this game is built. So much I wouldn't blame you for looking at the recap and thinking that The World Ends With You is actually a visual novel. So when it comes to cinematics, like I just said, this game is surprisingly structured similar to a visual novel. It's divided up into distinct chapters. Every scene is just a series of 2 speech bubbles in the middle of a few characters going back and forth, and the few cutscenes we do get, they are very simple, almost primitive slideshows. Every character has what feels like 10 poses, and there is so little voice acting outside of battle shouts that it makes me wonder why they bothered at all. It makes me wonder, with the new one being fully 3D, if that means dialogue will be presented in a different fashion. The delivery of dialogue and budget manner of cutscenes is nothing to write home about, and I hope it's not a limitation imposed on the sequel for the sake of quote-unquote tradition. It's a sequel, you can be different, it's fine. In this case, because of the platform it was originally on and how much dialogue there is, I'm not really mad that its exposition is delivered in my least favorite manner. And at least they tried to emote with a few sprites and prioritize the dialogue itself. They didn't waste our time having a big text box with characters in real estate shown on the screen that don't do anything. At least they kind of made the dialogue front and center, and so I'm okay with that. When you think about it, for a modern Square Enix game, it is surprisingly a non-cinematic game. Maybe that's why it's not very popular compared to its other brands. So for gameplay, an RPG 2D brawler is pretty rare. 30 years ago in the arcade heydays, there were a handful of them, almost being, all those just being gear focused as well. I played a couple of them, or at least on emulator, and that breed of game is a very rare sight these days. Also, the battling is highly customizable and responsive, with both the touch and motion controls, imagine that. You can adjust both the level and challenge of the encounters, there's a risk-reward relationship, and a simple system that just ties together supporting systems like food, clothes, the progress in game. Now, I know I've already said to death, I don't personally like playing it, but I definitely recognize it's a well-designed and well-thought-out system. That being said, I do not think tying so much grinding to everything was fun. Fight, shop, answer quizzes, spawn special enemies, digest food, leveling up pins, finding reports, everything is just grind more battles, grind more battles, grind more battles. I also never liked Tin Pen Slammer. I don't love it. I think it's a bad minigame. It's fine just existing, but I just didn't find it fun at all, and I hated being forced to play it at any time. That's why I hated it being central to another day. I didn't like it. That was already an optional time, and the only thing you would ever do that's relatable for it is the secret report. That's the only thing that matters in another day. Everything else is pointless. That's why none of it's there except for the secret report that exposes the fallen angel. And another nitpick I have against any game, not just this one, is where a character has a voice line tied to a highly repeated action, so you constantly hear that voice line over and over and over again. I am just so tired of hearing Neku yell "dumbass" every time he dodges. I'm so tired of it. On a more positive note, at first I didn't like having to constantly be forced to shop and swap styles, shop and swap, swap and shop. But then you realize Shibuya is a shopping district and it's ruled by fashion. And, then you kind of also realize that's the point. Or at least it's consistent. I do like the idea of raising stats by digesting food, and despite my feelings on battling, pacing it alongside battling is a good idea. I really can't think of a better way of doing it. Like I said, I just don't like the implementation. I'm perfectly fine with the system that exists. The world itself is pretty limited, by the way, in scope. The world is limited. It ends with you. But actually, it's deeper in content than you may realize. Environments are not very large, and your only options are scan people, start fights, or enter shops. But in this case, that's all fine, because there is a sense of urgency in the plot of the game, so there is context. As a side note, I like the idle animations for a lot of them. Shops have way more depth to them, by the way, to the point where there are entire mechanics built into them. There's also a lot of evolving commentary from the shops as your relationship goes up, or how you shop, and it's more effort than I expected. There's also enough detailing in the environments to where they often are wall reaper questions, which is nice in hindsight. So it's a tight-knit Shibuya and does a good job, again, of having the world reflect that in small but frequent ways. I also want to throw a question out there of why, when the town was almost completely taken over by the red pins, the vendors were all completely fine. Not even by accident was anyone wearing the hottest pin in town, the red skull, especially Makoto of all people, and I just kind of find that weird. I was expecting to see some of the shopkeepers affected by it, and nobody was, and I don't know. Maybe there's a reason I missed out, but I'm pretty sure that was just an oversight. Or maybe Kisunichi deliberately said, nah, it's part of the game to have shops, so we're going to make sure that they're specifically left alone, even though the Reapers weren't left alone. Anyway, as far as pacing goes, I think this game is bad. Any gaps in story is just a constant cycle of buying crap and battling for the sake of more battles to buy more crap. or just getting Reapers unlocked, or just more unlocks. You will revisit and refight the same crap over and over. Worse yet, in A New Day, they go crazy with the battles, and they take so much longer compared to normal. Really, the battles are, to be fair, they're only like maybe 2-3 minutes long for the average battle, but they're just so frequent, especially when you chain them together and then they take so much longer. Especially bosses. Bosses have ginormous health bars. It's absurd. Or the challenges with just these bullshit modifiers like enemies duplicating with full health, and then, oh, your health is constantly decaying, or, oh, we're gonna throw a bunch of invincible damage balls that kinda rubber band towards you, but you can't do anything about it, it's just a field hazard. And also, there are just 20 enemy sprites, and they each have like 5 recolors to simulate toughness. It just feels like that bloated padding methods that they used to use in early RPGs in the early 90s. It's just so tedious and tiresome. I pray the brawling and battling is not so much a chore in the new one, otherwise the story pacing itself, the story pacing mind you, is decent. There is a lot of side junk and filler to kind of just pad in chapters. They really don't deal much in, there are side quests, but the side quests are more battling. And the side arcs I go by, you can, I don't want to say pursue them, but they evolve alongside the story in a kind of non-intrusive way. And so you're mostly focused on just the story, so because that focused, even the filler content, it's not that bad. It's still moving even when it's slow. So, I mean, the recap helps, but I think it could still afford to be tighter and better for storytelling. Now for music, this game surprisingly does not have a large track list. It's a little over 40 tracks, and a bunch of them are remixes of each other. At first, I wasn't feeling a lot of the music, wasn't a fan, but by the end of it, a few of the tracks actually grew on me, to the point where I would even be bopping my head to a few of them. What I find a little bothersome though, is that despite all of the theming going on, the different elements of the game, the story, the gameplay, the music is not one of them. Track selection for many scenes just seem random, and it does change randomly as you explore, change menus, or fight. So many songs just lack a mood that they use the same track to exhaustion to try and match certain events, and others barely get used, or they just throw them in, they just don't feel appropriate. It's a surprising misstep in this game, and on one hand, you could say the clashing nature of the music and story is appropriate for Shibuya, to which I would reply, you need to recheck the trends, bro. By the way, there are 4 versions of Twister in this game, and I personally think the Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance version, which isn't in this game, is the best one. I do like the final remix version though. As for my favorite tracks, I liked Junk Heap, which played a lot for show, appropriately enough, Deja Vu, 3 Minutes Clapping, and both versions of Calling. I like those tracks the most. So, an okay soundtrack. Very much an acquired taste, and even then, on the slim side of offerings. So how does it stack up? For the trifecta of fun, fascinating, and fulfilling, I'm going to weigh in emotionally on this. Was it fun? Not really, for me. The story and characters were interesting enough to keep me going, but all the battles and grinding was just torturous boredom to me. Was it fascinating? Yes. But when you dip into the postgame and then get into the secret reports in A New Day, then very yes. Ending aside, there is a lot to think about and speculate, there's a lot of discussion you can have, and the buzz for this game hasn't died down. People call it a cult classic, but it sold over 1 million copies, and probably more when the sequel comes out, so I wouldn't call it that like it's something small and unknown. Finally, was it fulfilling? Not really. It has a unique genre blend, great style, good messaging, good writing, but nothing in this game is what I would call essential or groundbreaking, and ironically trend-setting. In terms of rating, I would put this at a solid B. It's definitely a cut above the average, and it does a lot of elements well, but it's far from exceptional or genre-defining, and I see opportunities for improvement that hopefully show up in the sequel. I like it, and if you want to play an RPG with attitude and a different battle system, I recommend it, give it a shot. So, you can follow me on Twitter at OniBlackMage, streaming on YouTube and my Discord server. Thanks for being a patron or member, and I'll see you on the next battlefield.